Alright, so this video is for those of you that are familiar with React and you want to start using TypeScript. So we're going to be talking about how you can start doing that. We're going to cover three main things in this video. One, how you can integrate props and start checking the types of the props you're passing into a component. How you can integrate TypeScript with your hooks. And then lastly, how to create a render prop component with TypeScript and making it type safe. We're also just going to go over some general tricks and tips that I use that I find pretty helpful. Now, before we get into this, the first thing you really need to do is set up a project that can handle and compile TypeScript code. So for this, you can go ahead and set up Webpack and set up a tsconfig. But if you're just starting out, I recommend just like picking up a boilerplate that does all this for you by default. So the one I'm using in this video is create React app. And if you want to start a TypeScript project with that, you can run the following command: create React app, the name of your project, and then you just do the -- TypeScript flag, and then you're good to go. And so you get a project like this, and then you'll have your tsconfig filled out for you, and you don't even have to worry about Webpack and all that stuff. All right, so let's begin. So I have a component right here, and let's say I want to render another component here, and I want to make sure the props are being checked. So I have this TextField component that we're going to start with. All right, so this should look normal to those of you that are familiar with React, and this looks like a regular JavaScript React component here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is how I declare this thing as a component in TypeScript. So I can define the type of a variable here. So this variable is just TextField. Give it a colon here, and I can say react.fc. And this stands for, you can see in my autocomplete window, a function component. Oops. And so this is a type that React actually gives you. So React actually is giving you a TypeScript type that you can use here. So I just told everybody that this variable TextField is now a function component. And the next thing I can do is I can specify in angle brackets the props that it takes. Now I can pass in an object directly here and specify, for example, that it takes text, which is a string. Alternatively, you'll see a ton more people do this. They'll declare an interface. They'll usually call it props. So this is the name of the interface. And then you'll put all your information inside of here, like text, which is a string. And then right here, what we'll do is instead of having an object, we will pass in the name props. So as soon as I do this, I've now declared that this TextField component expects you to pass a prop called text, and it's of the type string. So what this means is if I come over here and I try rendering a text field, and that auto imported for me, thanks VS Code. So you'll notice I have not added anything yet, right? And it's giving me squigglies. And if I hover over this, it's going to tell me property text is missing. The other nice thing is if I put my cursor here and just do Control Space and I scroll up to the top, I'm actually going to see the three things that I can possibly pass to this component now. And I can see my text here. All right, so I can say hello. So now I'm passing in this prop, and now it's happy. It knows I should pass that in. And so the other properties, or I guess data types that you can do, is you can have a Boolean, you can have a number, and a number represents an integer or a double. So we can say I, for example. And then what else do we have? We have a function, which looks like this. So how a function works is you do an arrow function, and then you can either say what it returns here. So if you don't want to return anything, it could be void. You could return a number here, you could return a string, and so on. And then here's where you put in the parameters. So this expects a parameter called Bob, and that's a string. You can also do objects, and that's just using curly braces here. And I could say field1 is a string. You can also create an interface called person, which takes a first name, which is a string, and a last name, which is a string. And you could pass that as the type here. Right, so now my person, I'm basically passing an object in here as the type. And so I just added all of these as props to my text field, and so they're required for me to basically pass in now. And again, I can control space, and I can see all the ones that I need to pass in. So I can see I need a person. And now if I pass in an object and hit control space, we're also going to get auto completion here, which is pretty nice. So last name, blah, blah. And I can pass all of those in. Now let's say I don't want all of these to be mandatory. Like for example, I'm okay if you don't pass this in. You can do a question mark right before the colon, and that basically means that the field is optional, or the prop is optional, right? And so you don't have to pass that in now. So if I make all of these optional, I can come over here and I can see it's happy with me. But if I get rid of person, that one's mandatory, and now it's telling me about. So you can already see this is a pretty nice advantage that when you start using TypeScript is you can declare these things, and now anyone who's using your component knows immediately if they've passed in the correct amount of props. So cool. So that's basically props for you. And again, you create a React.functional component, you pass the props in this angle bracket right here. The other thing to note is you can access your props. You know this right here. But another nice thing is if I do control space with my cursor in between here, I get all the types here, and I can get auto completion as well. So oops, I can control space, person, control space, okay, and I can very easily expand that. So that's a pretty nice one. All right, so let's move on to hooks. So the most common hook you're probably going to use is useState. So by default, it's going to actually infer the type for you. So for example, if I put 5, and that's my count, and this is set count. Right, so I can see if I hover over count, I can see the type of it. So I can see that it's been inferred as a number. And you'll notice this didn't require me to do any extra work, right? It just automatically inferred. Now, let's say that I want to allow myself to set the count to 5, but also want to allow it to be null as well, right? There's no way for me to tell this that it can be 5 or null for it to be inferred. So in cases like this, you use angle brackets right here, and you can tell TypeScript what the exact type should be. So in this case, I'm going to tell it can be a number or it can be null. So in TypeScript, how you do or is a single pipe. So here I said this state that we're storing here can be a number or it can be null. And so now I can pass in null, or I can do 12 or 10 or whatever I want, and both work. One thing you may notice is undefined is a different type than null. So if you want to accept undefined as well, you can say or undefined. You could do or string, and I can take strings hello, right? And just like how we did with props, you can pass in an object here if you wanted. So let's say I wanted this to be text. You'll see immediately it's going to tell me that I didn't put in a correct initial state here. So I can say text hello. And so we're now going to get checking when we set the initial state and when we set the count here that this should be an object that we're passing in. And again, if we wanted to, could create an interface text node, which is text, and it's a string. So I just created an interface. We can pass the interface here. So you can pass interfaces or objects, or really just whatever the type is. So the next hook that is going to be a little bit weird is going to be a useRef. So for example, let's say I want to get reference to this input field here. So let's clean this up a bit. And I'm going to say, I guess let's say input ref is what I'll call it. And we're going to say useRef. And we can pass in a ref here. So if we hover over this, let's see it's getting mad at us. It's telling us that basically the types are not compatible. And so what we have to do is we need to tell TypeScript what the type of this reference is, or what it should be holding. So we can do this by passing in angle brackets right here and specifying what the input we're actually going to store in this. So an input can actually, or a ref can actually store anything. So again, we could put any type here. But in this case, what we want to pass is this input. So what I'm about to do is show you a pro tip that's going to help you out a lot. So it doesn't matter what component you're setting up, or you're wanting to figure out what you're supposed to put the value in here for the ref. What you can do is usually I just write ref is equal to an empty brackets here, and I hover over ref. And now this may look like total madness right now, but you'll get used to reading this. So basically, this part right here is just the name ref, and you can ignore it. We don't really care about that part. But after the colon, this is the part we care about. So this is the TypeScript definition of what we should be passing in to this property. So we should either be passing in a string, or we should be passing in this function, or we should be passing in a ref object. And the ref object is actually what we are passing, and it'll even tell you right here it expects a ref object, and in the angle brackets you should be putting HTML input element. Perfect. So I copy that and put it right here. And now I can put input ref here, and now it is happy. Well, it should be happy. It's not. Let's see what it doesn't like. Currents are incompatible. Type in HTML input or undefined is not assignable to HTML or null. All right. Oh, it's because I did. Okay, it's because I did nothing in my parentheses here. If I put null, yay, now it's happy. Okay, so that's the other thing you're gonna get used to with TypeScript. They have these kind of odd looking error messages. You're gonna have to get used to reading some of these, but when you get used to them, they're not too bad. Usually I scroll down to near the bottom and you can kind of get the gist of them. All right, this was the particular line that cued me into what I was doing wrong. And I can see that I was passing, this is the current type, and this is what it should be. All right, so that gives you another hint of what you could be passing here. All right, so it should be null by default, and then we're passing it in. So cool, now it's happy with us. And so I can use this with no matter what I'm trying to get the ref of, or no matter what prop I'm trying to pass in, I can use this hover technique to figure out what I should be doing. All right, just to exemplify this, let's do this one more time. So let's do a div ref. All right, ref and div ref. Right, it's actually pretty happy with me just passing it in like that. That's surprising. But if I hover over the ref here, I can see I should be passing an HTML div element. Pass that in, and there we go. So again, just hover over the ref and it'll tell you. So here's another example of doing that in kind of a different context. So let's say I want to take the onChange method of input, right? So onChange, and take that as a prop. All right, so we'll call it handle change. Well, what should this function be here? Right? If I want to correctly give this the right type, what should handle change be? That way I can do handle change and pass it here. Right? So I can pass it in here right now, and it's happy with me, but we're not getting the full definition, right? Because there's an event we can pass in here. So this is where we can do the exact same thing. I can hover over this, and I'm kind of blocking this. So let's scroll up a little bit. If we hover over this, we can see that, again, look for the colon, first colon. So onChange takes the type of a function, and this function can either return, well, here, there we go. So it can either take a function or it can take undefined, and the function that you pass in takes an event as an argument. So what I can do is I can copy this, and I can paste it here. And there you go. I have the correct type for this handle change now to be passed in. And so the cool thing about when you get the correct type passed in is that means I get type definitions over here. And really what that amounts to is I get nice auto-completion now. So I pass in my handle change, here's my function, and now I can do e dot, and I can see all the different things that I have access because this is a input event. So that's that. That's how you kind of find the types you should be passing in to different stuff. Hover is your best friend when you're using TypeScript. Go check those out. Okay, cool. So the next hook that I want to go over is the reducer hook. So let's hop over here. So the reducer hook works a little bit different than those two hooks. So here's me using the reducer hook in action. So I said use reducer. Here's my reducer function, and then this is my initial state. So you'll notice no types actually go here. But in our to-do reducer, that's where we add stuff. So in our to-do reducer, what we specify is the state of our reducer. So this is a type that tells us what we're actually storing in the state. And then we also pass a type of the possible actions. So I called this action, but really this should probably be actions. Also, I just pushed F2 here. F2 is what allowed me to just rename both of these variables. Yeah, so this is the possible actions. So let's walk through this real quick. So first, I want to define all the different actions that I can pass for my reducer here. So the way you do that is you say type actions, and you say equal sign, and then you see we have the or pipes here. So we're saying object or this other object. And here I specify the type and any other variables or fields I pass into this action. So in this case, if I'm adding a to-do, I want to also pass the text. If I'm removing a to-do, I want to pass in the index. And so that's a string and that's a number. So I have two objects here that are possible actions. And then here you can see I created an interface called to-do. Text is a string and complete is a boolean. And then we just have an array of those. So I actually forgot to mention array as one of the basic data types, but this is how you create an array. You can also create an array like this. Array, and then in your brackets you specify the type. But yeah, so here I said type state is equal to an array of to-dos. So in my to-do reducer, we're just storing an array of to-dos. So that's what that's doing. So basically in your to-do reducer, you need to create these two types, what your state's going to be and what actions you accept. And that's how you type the use reducer. And so when you do both of those things, what you get is actually some really nice auto-completion again. So when I'm dispatching an event now, you can see if I hit Control Space while my cursor's here, I can see all different ones I can possibly pass in. If I click Type, I'm also getting auto-completion of the types that I can pass in. So I can pass in add or remove. And then if I pick remove as my type, I can see I need to pass in an IDX. So let's do 5. So that's pretty sweet. And then again, my to-dos here, it knows that my state is an array of to-dos because we passed it right here. So now I know it's an array, I can get the first element, and I can see text and complete from that. So there you go, that is how you can do the use reducer hook. The other hooks, there's not too much other stuff you have to do for TypeScript for them, so I'm going to go ahead and skip them and go to the last thing that I want to talk about, which is render props. So we're going to create a new component here called counter. And I forgot to mention this, but in TypeScript, one of the big differences you're going to see, really I should have mentioned this right away, is you do .tsx for your file name instead of .jsx. And then in non-TypeScript files, you call them, non-React files, you call them .ts. So .tsx for React and non-ones are .ts. So I like to use this little snippet. I call it RH, and it'll basically do this for me. And then I can call this counter. So if you'd like to do the same thing, I'll show you how in a sec, but basically what I do here is I export my component, I have a function component here, and I have just an empty interface. I can now pass in my types or the props that it accepts. Now if you want to actually do that, you just go to your settings here, preferences, user snippets. And if you go to TypeScript React, you can see this is my particular snippet. And I'll put this below if you want to see all my snippets, but this is the one snippet that I use a lot when doing React and TypeScript. Alright, so I have my new component here. So what I want with this component is we're going to say const use state. We're going to just store a counter here. We're going to have count, set count, and we're going to just turn this into a render prop. So what I want to do is I'm going to render a div, then we're going to render some children. And now my children, I want to give them what the count is. And I want to allow them to update the count. Okay, so this is just a very simple render prop. Now, to actually get the type definition for this, what I do is I say children in my props, and this is a function that returns JSX element, or it returns null. And then here I can say the first variable is count, which is a number, and set count is something. So what do we think set count is? Well, I can just hover over here and I can see exactly what it is. And I can copy this type. Oops. And we could paste it in there if we want to. Dang it. There we go. Right? So we just pass in right here all the parameters that our function takes, and then this is the big thing. We return JSX. So now in our app over here, you can get rid of our text field, and I can render a counter. Right? And I can render a div, and let's say I want to render the count here. We can have the count, and we can have set count. And this is going to have, right, if we hover over, it's going to have the type, so it's going to check stuff for us. So let's say we have a button, right, and we want to increment. You can say on click, set count is equal to count plus 1. Now if I were to happen to do something silly and pass like a string, it's going to catch it for me because it knows what the type should be. Right, so that is how you can properly type a render prop, and I still tend to use these now and then, so I figured I'd show you guys. And again, this doesn't have to be multiple parameters. This could be a single object. All right. This is another common way you'll see them working. So I have a single parameter called data, and inside of that is an object, or really the type of data is an object. So we have our count and our set count, and now I can just destructure this. That's the other thing you'll notice about functions and TypeScript is you actually have to, we need to pass it correctly here too, is you have to give them a name. So the name of the first parameter I'm calling is data. So yeah, so that is rendered props. Really, there's really just one last thing I want to leave you guys with, and that is whenever you're unsure about some things, or another good way of learning some of the types of these things is to actually right click on them. And there's two things you can do. You can peek the definition, and this will show you a little sneak peek of what the type is. Now again, this may look like pure gibberish to you at first, but as you get better at TypeScript and you can Google some of these and take it slow, you can kind of break down what they're starting to do for the type of this. I actually clicked into this, but you can also right click and go to definition, and that'll actually take you to the file. So for example here, I can see that use state takes this S thing. That's a generic, by the way. And I can see that it has this dispatch type. And I can go to definition of the dispatch type, and I can see what that is. And I can read all the types that React uses. And you can do this with any library that uses TypeScript. So that's a helpful thing that I use now and then. But there you go. That is an introduction into TypeScript and React and some helpful things that I use.